Greetings and welcome to another Grenfell MediaWatch update. Now today's edition I want to call Kaiser Söze. Where do I start? The inquiry. Now some of you may not know, for those of you who can't keep up with the Grenfell inquiry live streaming that takes place every day, the BBC have actually put together a podcast. It's quite useful actually. Looks at the day's events in 20 minutes, kind of summarises it with commentary and puts it online. So it's kind of like an inquiry watch if you'd like. But there are issues with it. The focus, of course, coming from the BBC isn't the same as that coming from Grenfell MediaWatch team. For example, right now everyone's focusing on the testimony by the firefighters. And they're looking at the contradictions in testimony, where one person said one thing, other person maybe contradicts them. And in some ways trying to catch them out. That's not really the focus, that's not really what I hear. And it's not what I think we should be looking at. One of the clearest things I've picked up from this inquiry so far is that those firefighters were, and I think someone's made the point, lucky to escape with their lives. And if you think about what happened recently in Thailand with, I think it was a Navy SEAL who lost his life when he went in to rescue the boys. Anyone who's actually placing their life at risk to save others, we need to give the benefit of the doubt. Now, depending on what perspective you're looking at, you can take home different messages from the inquiry. I heard some amazing stories of some brave human beings who were innovative. When their equipment failed, they were using pencil and paper to pass notes about who to go up to rescue. I heard about someone trying to put together a daring plan of reaching the roof of Grenfell to actually extinguish the fire. I mean, there were some amazing tales, and like I said, it was a miracle, but none of them lost their lives. But what I think that we've always got to remember is that phase one of this inquiry, and I can't repeat this enough, is not about finding who's responsible. It's not about justice. It's about providing a narrative of the events that took place on the 14th of June. And one of the challenges that we have as a media group has, we're finding out that newspapers are starting to move away from covering Grenfell to find other topics which they find more interesting, is that when they do cover Grenfell, they take one or two slants. Those that are supportive are quite innovative. So there was this really interesting article about the Piper Alpha oil platform. And this is a case of a fire 30 years ago where 167 people died. Now that article, which looks at the Piper Alpha disaster and compares it with the tragedy at Grenfell, makes a really interesting point. And they ask, how could the firefighters know that Grenfell had been constructed with cut-price materials and substandard systems? I mean, of course, that would render all normal safety procedures meaningless, completely inert. And I think that's a really good point. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not for one moment saying that I agree with the comments that came out of the inquiry that the stay put policy saved lives. I have serious reservations with this. I'm also not agreeing that a mass evacuation of residents from Grenfell would have actually been catastrophic. I actually don't believe that. But what I am saying is that this looking at placing blame on the firefighters is all smokes and daggers stuff. But the media also has another trick, and we've seen it playing this blame game over...
Yeah, gang sign, throwing it up on the camera.
We've also seen the media playing this blame game trick, and in this particular instance, we know that it's been using the term Grenfell Tower fraudsters again to kind of besmirch the whole community. Instead of actually what it could have done. Do you remember that brother who was demonised for the fire starting in his house, and everyone saying that, well, not everyone from our side, but everyone from the tabloid media, kind of trying to create a witch hunt about him. Well, what we now know from the inquiry was that he went out barefooted, knocking on his neighbours' doors, trying to get people to safety. They should have been apologising and recognised that he was actually acting heroic on that day as well. So what is the national picture when it comes to things like cladding? Well, we've now been told that some 470 high-rise buildings also contain the same or similar cladding to that which was on Grenfell, stuff that's combustible. And out of that 470, I think only 19 above a certain height have been removed. The media is also reporting that some of the replacement cladding that's being used is also flammable. So there's really a big issue about this testing regime to make sure the materials that are being used are safe. Now last week we also learned that the Home Office is actually putting a block in and slowing down the wheels of justice. Now the Home Office, which is now run by Javid Javid, my apologies, who was previously one of the ministers involved in housing and communities and looking after Grenfell. Job not done. Well, what they're doing now is limiting the visas of Grenfell survivors who are core participants to the inquiry to 6 months. Now we know that the inquiry is going to take longer than 6 months. This is only phase one, and like I say, it doesn't look at the process of justice. But again, what it does, it kicks things into the long grass. So finally, let's take a look at what's happening when it comes to the issue of support for the Grenfell community. Now we know that there was a group of school children who they're going through some bad times emotionally, reliving the Grenfell massacre, and a school in Dorset gave them a wonderful trip out, and we know that national support and this compassion is still there. Also, a scholarship set up in the name of 2 Italian architects who perished during the Grenfell fire has actually announced its first winner. So the legacy of some of those people will continue to live on. But politically, things are still bad. There's still 115 households in temporary or emergency accommodation out of the 203. Yeah, we're talking about more than half. Now, if the council can't even get this right at this stage, we know we've got some serious problems when it goes into phase 2 of the inquiry. But of course, what else is happening? Well, last week, Stormzy, once again, big him up, spoke out to 50,000 fans at an event called Wireless, raising the profile of Grenfell. This time the media was quiet on this. Wasn't so much coverage. And I think we've got to learn from that. Anyway, later this week, there's going to be mass protests against Trump. The media is likely to be focusing non-stop on the Brexit negotiations as the Tory government faces its next crisis. And it'd be very easy to forget that this Saturday on the 14th will be another silent walk. I think it's taking place at 6 o'clock, starting from the Methodist Church as usual, like in the original days. Now, this edition of the update was called Kaiser Söze, and it's in reference to a film I saw years ago, and there's this wonderful quote that goes that the greatest trick the devil ever achieved was to convince the world that he didn't exist. So this is what seems to be happening with Grenfell. And what I'm going to suggest is that we keep our eye on the ball. So as ever, I want to close and say, may the ancestors continue to guide and protect us. Asher.